Good afternoon. Welcome to SOGCast number 30. And SOGCast is stories about the secret war in Vietnam and other stories that spin off from that. And we want to thank Jocko Productions for making this possible in conjunction with SOG Chronicles. And during my time, we were in the secret war with SOG, and we signed disclosures saying we will not talk about it for 20 years. And so about 15 years after the war in Vietnam ended, I was at a newsstand, and on the front page of a magazine, there was a huge picture of the SOG emblem saying SOG, and there was a big story in the magazine. The magazine was Soldier of Fortune magazine, and that was the beginning of a long historic project of a magazine that went on to, over time, print more than a dozen stories that were actual, factual, as opposed to a lot of the fiction and other media crap that came out after the Vietnam War. In addition to that, the other thing that attracted me to Soldier of Fortune magazine was the fact that it was written for Vietnam vets. It talked about the positive aspects of Vietnam vets at a time when there was many disparaging things and lack of accurate reporting on the courage of the Vietnam vets that fought in the war in Vietnam. Today, it is my honor and privilege to introduce the founder and the publisher of Soldier of Fortune magazine, Robert K. Brown. Robert, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you much.
Indeed.
It's a pleasure to be here and babble with you.
We will babble on, sir. And I'll never forget that day, the news rack. I said, this can't be out yet. And yet, there you were with your magazine. Jim Graves did a story. And it was the first publication that talked about it. And then you went on. Of course, years later, you and I met. And then I did some stories for it that were on SOG that began in Soldier of Fortune. And then I used those editions for later books that I wrote on SOG, thanks to you.
Well, one of the purposes, or the major purpose, I guess, of Soldier of Fortune magazine was to portray the Vietnam veteran in a respectable manner and give credit where credit is due. You know, the people that shed blood over there, their blood was just as red as the people that shed blood in World War II, Korea, or World War I. But they never got the recognition that even in those conflicts. And our mission was to, frankly, publish Vietnam hero stories and then give credit where credit was due and overdue.
Indeed. And then over time, whenever there was shooting involved, where Americans might be involved, or there were causes of great injustice where mercenaries or whoever was going to fight those who were being oppressed, Soldier of Fortune sent correspondents there.
Well, not only did we send them there, Tilt, but unfortunately, I had a number of reporters killed in action. The first one was George Bacon, who was a former SOG operative.
No, you're right. You're very right. It was SOG.
And then he was with the CIA in Laos.
Correct. And he was with me at FOB 1 Phu Bai. That's where I met George Washington Bacon III.
And then he was killed in Angola in '76 by a Cuban ambush.
Cuban ambush, right.
And then Micah Chanis was killed in Nicaragua in '79. Lance Motley was killed in Burma in '87. And of course, Robert McKenzie was killed in Sierra Leone in '95. So we did a lot of interesting reporting, but we obviously paid the price too.
Indeed. And, you know, a part of that was you went there personally. And more often than not, if you were in Afghanistan, if there was a big war going on in Afghanistan, you were there.
Well, this is what was unique about Soldier of Fortune magazine is, you know, we went and we did stuff that no other journalistic enterprise would do. And so we trained people. We actually got in situations where we pulled a couple of triggers. but we got involved in a lot of stuff that was supporting, for instance, the Contras. We collected material that was sent by our readership to our office. We totaled 7 tons of equipment we sent down with the Contras in the mid-'80s. Other publications didn't do anything like this, nor would they have conventions like we had for our readers for 23 years.
Well, I well remember the September 1980 convention, which was historic. That was your first one in Vegas?
Well, the first convention we had was in Columbia, Missouri, in 1980.
Right, but didn't you have General Westmoreland?
No, we
Jack
had
Singlaub at that one?
That was in our third convention. That was in Charlotte, North Carolina. So at the banquet table, we had General Westmoreland, we had Aaron Banks.
Well, Colonel Banks, yes.
Colonel Banks spoke, and also G. Gordon Liddy. So that was quite a crew that we had. And of course, we made a presentation to Fred Zabatowski, who was a Medal of Honor recipient that worked with us in Bangkok on our POWMI efforts.
And just for our listeners, Fred Zabatowski earned the Medal of Honor on a recon team out of CCC in Khartoum in 1968, a fellow Trenton, New Jersey resident.
Yes. So it was, we've had some very interesting keynote speakers.
Absolutely. And, the other thing, getting back to Fred and that one mission, the one issue that you've always reported on, and you put a lot of money behind an effort to try to find POWs or MIAs from the Vietnam War. I mean, we both know and feel that American prisoners were left behind, particularly from the Secret War. Well, but we never had the concrete proof, but you put your money behind it, an investigation into it, and attempted, you came very close.
Well, we did. We did some things that were quite unusual. We actually established a base camp, a small A-team camp, if you will, without the concertina wire or claymores, actually inside communist Laos. We had 120 armed men, tribesmen. We provided them with ammo, with the food.
And training.
And we had them on tap in case we actually found a situation where we needed to go in and conduct a military operation to free American POWs. Because we were misled by the intel we were getting, that never occurred. But it was rather unique for a magazine to establish a base camp inside communist Laos.
Indeed, and that, to me, I always applauded that effort. You went forward with the best of intentions, and you and Fred Zabatowski, who was an experienced recon man and highly respected soldier, worked hard on that, and you all were a team. And at some point, you ran into folks who were less than, they had an integrity problem.
Well, yes, to say the least. In fact, we did a major article that you and I have both reread recently that appeared in our 1995 25th anniversary issue called The Sting.
It just happened to have a copy of your 25th anniversary edition where that article is in. Yes, sir.
So we ended up working with a rogue CIA agent by the name of Bill Young, who himself was a fascinating. I've run into a lot of strange people in my 40-some years in this business. In fact, I was talking to Mitch Utterbach the other day about the fact that I had met, when I was in Madrid, I'd met Otto.
Lieutenant Colonel Mitch Utterbach has appeared on a SOGCast interview with us.
I had an interview with Otto Skorzeny.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Please,
What I was doing in Madrid is I was working on a book, a manuscript that never got published, with a former Life magazine correspondent that I'd done some freelance work for before I went to Vietnam. And he was very well connected. He spoke fluent Spanish, of course, and one day he just asked me, well, would you like an interview with Otto Skorzeny?
No.
And I said, well, why not? Well, in the course of my planning, you see, I had planned to go to Africa after I finished my work in Madrid. So I had brought with me to Madrid an M1A rifle scoped with an ART telescope on it.
Okay.
And a Automag 44 Magnum. So I met with Otto Skorzeny, and one thing turned to the other, and we started talking about snipers, and I told him what I had with me, and I had it in bond. My Life magazine friend had arranged with Customs to put the guns in bond because obviously I couldn't bring them into Spain.
Sure.
So I told him about this weapon system and the fact that we were getting kills at 900 yards in Nam, and Skorzeny wouldn't believe it. He said, well, when I was on the Eastern Front, our snipers only killed people at 300 yards. I just don't believe you.
Really?
Yeah, my big
But could we just say so our viewing audience who don't know Otto Skorzeny, he was the top secret spec ops guy for the Third Reich.
Yes. He rescued Mussolini.
Mussolini, yes, from a hilltop daring rescue in the rain.
So,
which there's a whole book on that alone.
One of my big mistakes was I failed to bring a camera with me, so I didn't get a photo with him. But, he was operating under some kind of a construction company, some kind of bullshit front.
Yeah.
And he was a piece of work, I'll tell you that. And, of course, he had this ragged dueling scar on his right temple.
Right.
It apparently was a thing to do back in Prussia during that time frame that everybody in the elite military ended up with a dueling scar on their right temple.
No kidding.
How did we get off on that?
Well, it's just a little sidebar that's fascinating, which is an indication of why you're here today. Yeah. Because your life, your history, and your well-intended efforts on many different fronts. And there's always the sidebars of you, the character. And this is before you went to Vietnam. And maybe talk a little bit even about... Early on when I heard about you, somebody told me, hey, he's the only Green Beret officer I know who got thrown out of Special Forces twice. I didn't believe it. And I came to you and said, oh, yeah, fuck, I got thrown out twice.
Well, do you want to go into that?
Well, sure, why not? I mean, this is part of your flamboyant character, sir.
It all goes back the beginning.
The very beginning.
So I was hanging out with these soldiers of fortune in Miami. And one of them... Before
you joined the Army? Or
No, this was about early 60s, 62. And I met a young man down there that had been in the Special Forces Reserve, and he had gone on active duty. He had gone to the 46th Company in Thailand.
Right.
And when they did a security clearance on him, after 6 months, they found out that he'd been working with some of the Cuban exile groups against Castro. And so they yanked his security clearance and brought him back after 6 months. And I thought, oh, shit. When they start looking at my security clearance or my background, and you see, I had a background in intelligence. I had done my first tour in the Army as a counterintelligence officer. And I knew that it took 6 months to do a security clearance. So I said, well, what the fuck? Let them send me to Vietnam.
Yeah.
If they want to send me back after 6 months when they figure out all the nasty stuff I've been involved in, well, then screw them.
Yeah.
So that was my plan.
Okay.
My plan was when I got called back to active duty after I volunteered to return to active duty, they sent me to Fort Bragg, and I assumed because of my background and publishing background, the fact that I had a master's degree, they assigned me as G2. And I felt uncomfortable about this with my background, and so I thought I'd best talk to the assistant chief of staff of G2 and tell him a little bit about my background that some people would consider somewhat controversial, to include that I had been propositioned to assassinate Kennedy, which I thought was, when it occurred, I thought it was kind of amusing, but quite impractical, and not to say immoral. So I told him about a couple of these things, and he said, well, don't worry. We'll go on leave. We'll pull your security clearance. And when I came back off of leave, he said, you're not going to be in G2 anymore. I said, saluted, and went down to personnel, and personnel said, you're not going to be in Special Forces anymore, and I saluted. But, as bizarre as my career been, I've always landed on my feet, so they sent me over to assistant G3, and he gave me two choices for the 6 months tour that I had to do before I went to NAM. And I had the choice of being running ROTC training for the summer, or I could be the officer in charge of the advanced marksmanship unit. Well, throw me in the briar patch, right? That took me about a nanosecond. So I ended up, for the next 6 months, doing nothing but shooting. And I went on a tour, and I shot professionally, essentially, with the team. So personnel called me and said, Brown, they screwed up. They didn't up-to-date your security clearance. But you see, I kind of knew that I had them by the short hairs, because what are they going to do? Kick me out of the Army because I've been doing an investigation on CIA fuck-ups in Miami? I don't think so.
Right.
So what was strange about it, though, when I talked to this colonel at OPO, he said, well, Brown, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to go to Special Forces in Vietnam. Well, you can't go to Special Forces in Vietnam. Well, I just want to go to Vietnam. And he said, well, do you want to go to language school? Do you want to go to Ranger school? Now, a captain being asked what he wanted to do?
Yeah.
Very strange. It's like I've always wanted to be a fly on the wall at promotion board. How did I get ever promoted to a major, much less lieutenant colonel? I have no idea with all this weird shit. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
So anyhow, I got sent to Vietnam with the 1st Division.
The big red one.
And strangely enough, I ended up very shortly in intelligence. I was a battalion S2 with no security clearance.
So what's the time frame of that? This 64, 65?
No, this is I got in country in July of 69.
Okay.
And so, of course, the fact that I was able to get in Special Forces in the first place was kind of bizarre. Because to get in Special Forces or go to Special Forces officers course, you had to be jump qualified. Well, how did you get jump qualified as reservist? Back in those days, the only way you could get qualified as qualified to attend jump school is if, in fact, you were assigned to a jump unit. Well, there were no airborne jump units because I think there was one in Texas. So when I was going to the advanced course, infantry advanced course, which I shouldn't have been going to anyhow because my branch was intelligence, I became friends with the student company commander, the first sergeant, the company. And, the NCOs have a mafia. Their connections are far more effective sometimes than people know.
Particularly in those days, you had the sergeant major mafia.
Yeah, and so he, for a couple of bottles of Southern Comfort, he was able to get me airborne orders to go to airborne school, and I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't supposed to go there. But I did, and I graduated, so that meant I could apply for Special Forces officer course.
Right.
And so that's how I became, that's how Oh, he got in Special Forces.
But you didn't bother going through Special Forces officer course.
Well, speaking of that was a great fun story because, when we, there were about 60 of us in the course. Back in those days, the officers' course was pretty much a gentleman's course. So from the very beginning, the class kind of split in two between people that believed in doing precisely what the lessons plans were or what the regs were, and people said, well, we do whatever we need to get done.
Think outside the box once in a while.
So it almost ended up with some fistfights between the two factions. So the final exercise we had was, out in the woods for a couple of weeks, I think, and the final exercise was that the main force, our class, were supposed to come down this river in rubber boats and blow a bridge. Well, my team, which had split into two factions between people that follow regs and people said bullshit to that crap, we had the bridge under surveillance for reasons I do not recollect. We had no radio comm with our major unit. But we saw that the 82nd had their gun jeeps positioned along the river. So the whole thing, the final culmination of the exercise was that the gun jeeps were going to shoot up of course, with blanks.
Right.
And everybody would get together and have beer and chicken.
Sing Kumbaya.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for reasons unknown, myself and this other captain, Louis Lopez, who retired as a light colonel, we were demo men. And so the leader of our particular team was one of the people that believed in just doing what the regulations were, or what the lesson plan said. We said bullshit. We found out we developed new intelligence that the 82nd was going to ambush our people, and so we should do something. And he said, no, we just go along with the plan.
Go along and get ambushed.
So myself, I said to Louis, I said, well, fuck this shit. Let's go blow the bridge ourselves. So we had the primacord and fuse lighters, and we stole a boat. Of course, that was against regulations. And paddled.
Of course.
And we paddled down to got about 50 yards from the bridge. We surveyed the area, reconned it, and so we got back in the boat and went up to the bridge supports and wrapped the primacord around them, pulled the fuse lighters and paddled away and blew the bridge, hypothetically, an hour before it was supposed to happen. So that really pissed everybody off because, the chicken wasn't cooked yet. But we did, and the instructors wouldn't talk to us the rest of the course because we screwed up the operation. But one of them admitted we did what was right because we acted on new intelligence. So anyhow, you see, I just kind of stirred the pot where I went.
Indeed.
But
so back to the tape a little further. So at what point? Because now you're a youthful 89, and when did your interest in the military begin? And then when at one point you say, I'm going to enlist in Uncle Sam's Army?
Well, back in those days, keep in mind, I graduated from high school in 1950.
Wow. And
back in those days,
just in time for the Korean War.
If you're a young male, you're going to get drafted or you're going to enlist, one of the two. And I'd gone to ROTC. I did a couple of years up at Michigan State. I was quite immature at the time. Of course, some people would argue the fact that I haven't changed. But be that as it may, I was in Air Force ROTC, and the situation had developed that the dean and men and I had a disagreement, and I lost. So I went out to the University of Colorado, because where the Cowboys and Indians were.
Sure.
And I was in Air Force ROTC, and it suddenly occurred to me that I wasn't going to be able to fly because of my eyesight.
Right.
So I decided I'd look around. I joined the Marine Corps Reserve because of the fancy uniforms.
Good-looking uniforms.
Oh, very.
Oh, yeah.
So I was there 11 months, and then I started looking around, and finally I got bamboozled by an Army recruiter who sold me on a bill of goods of enlisting. Back in those days, you could choose your school or branch if you enlisted for 3 instead of being drafted for 2.
Okay.
So I enlisted for 3 and went to the intelligence. I had visions of, this was before James Bond, of course.
Of course.
But I had visions of Cadillac convertibles and platinum blondes.
Sure.
Buxom, of course.
Of course.
And when I went out to Holabird, we were scheduled, in other words, I was scheduled to be a special agent. When we got out there, all the people in my company were college graduates. And they suddenly took about 40 of us and put us in a course of intelligent analysts, which is nothing more than a fucking security clerk with a security clearance, which caused great dissidence. And there were 7 of us. The regs were that if you flunked 3 tests, you were boarded and kicked out. I flunked 4. So I was the only one of 7. I went in, and keep in mind, very respectfully, to a board of a captain, a lieutenant, a couple of NCOs, and I respectfully told them that with all due respect, gentlemen, I had enlisted for being an agent, and now I'm. And they somehow decided to keep me in the course, but I'm still in the goddamn going to be a clerk.
Yeah.
So out of desperation, I looked around. Well, what can I do? I don't want to be a fucking clerk. So I went with OCS. There were 3 of us from the course to try to get an OCS, and I'm convinced the only reason I was accepted by OCS is when I did my verbal interview. The captain asked me, he says, well, Private Brown, what would you do if you had a recalcitrant NCO? Well, I used to be an amateur boxer, not very good. In fact, I got knocked out in 1 minute and 32 seconds of the first round of the Golden Gloves I fought in.
No.
But anyhow, I said, well, sir, I'd take him out behind the barracks and whop him. And he chuckled and said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Ha, ha, ha. I'm sure that's what got me appointed to OCS. I get down to OCS, I said, holy
This
shit.
is Fort Benning, Georgia.
Oh, yeah, what did I get myself into? And I'm about ready to, I quit because it was very lackadaisical at Fort Holabird, you know.
Okay.
We got passes.
Sure.
Back in those days, you had to have a pass to get off base.
To get off base?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Especially for the weekends. 72-hour pass was...
gold.
Yeah. It was gold, yes, it was. But the only thing that kept me in OCS is I, by chance, looked at the training schedule, and I saw in the 4th and 5th week, they had 2 weeks of training on the rifle range with the old M1 Garand, and I thought, my God, they have shooting scopes, and they have shooting jackets, and shooting gloves. I'll put up with this bullshit until I get through the shooting.
Right.
Well, I get through the shooting, I said, well, I'll stick around for another week and see if I can make the first 6-week cut, and I did. I said, well, I'll stick around a little further, and I just kept doing that until I graduated with 2 distinctions.
Really?
Yeah, I had the most demerits of anybody in the company. And I had the highest score on the machine gun range.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So what was the machine gun, a 30 caliber then?
Well,
Water
I should
cooled?
have 1986.
Whoa.
So then I was sent back to Fort Holabird to go to special agent school officers course. And, of course, I completed that. And
again, what's the time frame here a little bit?
well, this was in 1956.
Wow.
So I went, I was scheduled, I was sent back to complete the course. And since I had worked in personnel at Fort Holabird while I was waiting an appointment to the OCS, I got to know the people there pretty good. And when I came back to Fort Holabird, I knew these people, and for an intelligence enlisted man to become an officer in intelligence at Fort Benning was very unusual. So I had my choice of assignments. So I was going to go to airborne school and then the 11th Airborne Division in Germany.
Right.
But my father passed, and I decided for family obligations I should stay near home. So for the remainder of my tour as a special agent, which was cool because we had unmarked cars with radios and 38 specials and FBI credentials, or like FBI credentials, which were great for impressing the ladies.
Indeed.
Boring as shit because all we're doing is background investigations, right? So anyhow, that got out in 1957. I came back to the university where I set a new record in master's degree. I took 9 years to get my master's degree, which I'm sure they finally approved it just to get me the hell out of the department.
Right. And when the master's was in?
History.
Okay.
Minor in political science.
Right.
So.
Right up your alley.
Yeah, more or less. Actually, what can I say?
So at some point you get back to re-entering the Army or the Army Reserve.
Well, I was in the reserve on the pistol unit, their marksmanship unit. And then I started going to these reserve schools because that's the only way I could make a decent salary. And I went to the advanced course simply because I was getting divorced. And I wasn't making any money. But as a captain, I was making good money.
Yes, indeed.
So I kept going to these schools just to survive.
So at some point you find yourself in Vietnam, the first tour of duty.
Well, yeah, so what happened was I get over with the 1st Division, and I end up, once again, with no security clearances in the Battalion 2, which is a great job. I found we were in a static position because after Tet, they had positioned American battalions on all the main avenues of approach into Saigon.
And this is Tet Offensive 1968 by the NBA Viet Cong.
Yes. And so basically an S2 is responsible to keep the battalion commander advised on enemy terrain and weather. Well, there's not much to do because we just stayed in one location. And we had a TOC, Tactical Operations Center, in a water plant that was located between Saigon and Benoit. And it was great because it was air conditioned. It had been built by USAID money,
right?
USAID money, to provide. It shows how screwed up the U.S. government can be sometimes because they spent millions of dollars in building this fucking plant to put good purified water into Saigon, but it never worked because the pipes were all deteriorated.
No.
So, but the point is, it was air conditioning. In fact, it was kind of funny because after I'd been there a couple of months, the 1st Division, I think, was stationed at Lai Kay, which is a shithole. So this one staff officer comes down and interviews me to come up to Lai Kay to be an assistant quartermaster on trains to brief the appropriate parties on some quartermaster bullshit. Because I'd been a quartermaster before I became an S2 for about a month.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, you asshole, you want me to come from this fucking air conditioning place where near Saigon up to this shithole? I said, no. I said, look, you don't want to give me this job because I tell you what, I will make such an embarrassment when I first prove, they'll kick me out. So I didn't have to do that. But what happened was, you see, I had met a very prominent individual in Colorado by the name of John Paul Vann.
All right.
And I had met him through an individual that had written a book, which the author slips my mind, he was a guerrilla commander in the Philippines. And because I was publishing books on guerrilla warfare with Panther Press,
This is while you're still in the Army or after you got out?
This was after my first tour.
First tour, okay. Because, again, that's a significant part of your history. And just a little bit about what Panther Press was, if you don't mind.
Panther Publications.
Publications, thank you.
Well, what happened there, my goodness.
You could just give us a quick, then get back on your John Paul Vann, because he was one of the historic figures from the war.
When I went down to Cuba, I worked the second time. I worked as a stringer for the Associated Press.
This is before Castro came into power or after?
No, after.
Okay.
After. I went down the first time with a buddy of mine from the Army, and because of we couldn't get back to see Castro, we didn't understand the mañana concept of Latin America, and we ran out of money, so we came back. But when I went down in 1959, after the revolution, I was doing some freelance work for the Associated Press. And they sent me out on a story to do a story on this guy by the name of General Alberto Bayo. In fact,
you just happen to have your first copy.
Yeah, just happen to copy here, if we can see it.
For a guerrilla.
The reason they sent me out to interview this guy was because he had trained Castro in Mexico for 6 months, Castro and his initial band. And he had been a loyalist colonel in the Spanish Civil War.
Wow.
So, of course, when he came after Castro won, he came to Havana. And then he started making claims that he was going to invade Spain. And there had been some small bombs go off in Madrid. So the AP sent me out to interview him. And as a result, I did a story, 750 words. First story I ever had published in the AP. It went worldwide.
No.
Well, the ramifications of this I did not see until decades later when I saw my CIA file. And an acquaintance who was an Kennedy assassination aficionado.
Right, okay.
He had got my CIA file amongst other documents. And I made a deal with him where I traded a lifetime subscription of Soldier of Fortune for my CIA file.
What a deal.
Yeah. So my CIA files showed that after this article came out, the Spanish government complained to the American government about this, and the powers that be said, well, you shouldn't have done this, but they never told me this, and they transferred me from intelligence to infantry.
Wow.
So I saw that this guy Bayo was a potential subject for additional articles, and I went out to see him and interviewed him, and so I eventually got a copy of his book, which he used to train Castro, and I had it translated. I couldn't find a publisher, so I published it myself, and that was the beginning of Panther Publications.
Wow.
So anyhow, as a result of this, I met this chap that wrote this book on guerrilla warfare in the Philippines. He was an American officer that stayed out, he did not allow himself to be captured by the Japanese. And he, in turn, introduced me to John Paul Vann, who at that time was a civilian.
Working for USAID?
Yes. So when I'm over in Vietnam with the 1st Division, I found out that John Paul Vann was there. And I get in touch with him. Well, he was a civilian at the time, but the equivalent in the U.S. government of a 3-star general.
In that civilian world, he had power.
Yeah, so this guy had big-time clout. In fact, I have some photographs. I put on a weapons demonstration by a chap that was selling silencers to the U.S. Army, and I have pictures of John Paul Vann attending that demo. So I told Vann how frustrated I was, and I gave him and so he wrote a letter to Colonel Aaron and got me an in-country transfer from the 1st Division into Special Forces. But see, the people back in Washington didn't know that I was in Special Forces, and the people in Vietnam in Special Forces didn't know that I'd been kicked out. So then I got in a hassle with my B team commander, who was a real asshole, and because you see, when I went back in active duty, I knew I was not going to make it a career.
Okay.
So
and of course,
promised
you're an A-team captain in Vietnam now.
Yeah.
So you have an A-team.
Right.
And for our readers who may not know, or viewers, a B-team is set up to supply A-teams around the country. And there's more of a supply element and
administrative. Yeah.
And sometimes could be a pain in the fanny.
So this asshole of the B-team commander, who's passed now, George R. Murray, he was known throughout the area as being an asshole. So he came to me and said he wanted me to take a dozen of my troops, my Montagnards, and have them dress in black pajamas with AKs and go up and intercept the NVA 5th Division main supply route with no air or artillery cover.
Really?
And I told him no. Well, he made the same approach to my team sergeant, who told him no way.
Right.
Because there's no way he could bring us up on charges, because anybody would see that was a ridiculous request. I mean, this guy had, we made an insertion, airborne insertion, which we thought was possibly a hot LZ. And so at that time, the procedure was, you dismount, first choppers go in and secure half the LZ, and then the other chopper come in and secure the other half, and then you take off. Well, he made us wait there while he comes in to congratulate us on what a good insertion we make. Well, it deteriorated from there.
Got worse or worse?
We were running an op outside of our AO, our area of responsibility, and I sent out patrols, and we came in with a young man that they picked up in this deserted area in the rubber plantations. So we sent him back into B team headquarters, and they sent him back to us, and he led us into a infrastructure camp. And they heard us coming, so they left. We had him in camp in a secure area, and Colonel Murray and his counterpart, Major Long, came into my camp and said, Murray said, "Well, Captain Brown, how many people you killed this month?" And I said, "Well, we haven't killed anybody." He says, "Well, if your prisoner tries to escape and you kill him, you'll get a body count." And I was went into shock. I mean, I didn't know what to say. And finally I said, well, let me interrogate him for a few days, because I had experience in doing that when I was an intelligence officer with the 1st Division. So I had him a couple of days, and then I was told he tried to escape, and he was shot. He had made the same proposal to my team sergeant, so I had a witness. So I was not happy about this.
Yeah, the morality of it.
And I went to the CIA that I had. In fact, I got a letter of commendation from the CIA for my intelligence work with the 1st Division. That's another story. But they didn't have any operatives in the area. And so I just went up the chain of command, and they did an investigation on Murray. So I've got all the investigations. And they decided finally that there was not enough to bring Article 32 charges on. But it was a very interesting experience.
But again, you did what's right. I mean, the whole morality of just get a body count, and you have somebody you captured.
Yeah, precisely.
My goodness.
And I was convinced that also that my counterpart was VC sympathizer, because what had happened, he and I had butted heads because he was bringing. See, I had my camp. Most camp A teams had.
Which camp was this at that time?
Tonlashan. Most camps had a hamlet nearby.
Right.
We were out. The nearest friendlies were 22 clicks by air.
Really?
It was Fort Apache. When we closed the gates at night, anything moved outside died. We hadn't, I had a conflict with my counterpart, my Vietnamese Special Forces captain, because he was charging the mountain yards, my troops,
right,
an excessive amount of money for food, because they had their families, so we had to have supplementary food come in.
Sure.
So I broke his rice bowl, and we had other conflicts. He didn't want to go where there was any action. When my intel sergeant would say, well, we can most likely find some action here, he wanted to go the opposite direction. Well, this continues. You start getting a sense that there's some hanky-pank going on here, right? So, in May 9th of 1969, well, just the beginning of monsoon, and it was a dark, dreary day, light mist. And the situation was that we had a battalion right across the river from us that was starting to vacate. We had an airstrip, of course, and we had C-130s bringing them out. And we were taking a couple of casualties down there a day from mortars from the VC. And so on that particular day, midday, maybe later in the afternoon, why this Captain Long is with his bunch of slicky boys, is down at the end of the airstrip. And he radios me and he says, Captain Brown, come down, bring and see rockets. They had rockets, 107s on cross stick, pointed right down the runway. So I go down there and he said, I look at him, Captain Brown, please go up and get your camera and come back and take pictures. So, trying to be a good counterpart, I drove back up into the camp, and within a minute, the first round landed directly within the perimeter. So we had taken 107 rockets and 82 rockets, mortar rounds
right.
in the perimeter. Well, so happened that I had a patrol out, and by chance they heard the incoming coming right over them. So we looked at our map and drew an azimuth from where we were to where they were, and then we plotted the maximum range on a 80 deuce mortar is about 3,200 yards, and we plotted all the open areas and got the 8-digit coordinates. So the problem was we had no connection directly with the two 105 howitzers that were in our camp that were manned by South Vietnamese artillerymen they were firing, but they didn't know what the fuck they were firing at.
Right.
So we had these coordinates. So I asked for volunteers to run the coordinates over to the two 105 howitzers. I had no volunteers. So I volunteered myself. So I ran him over, and while this shit's coming in, and I gave him, now the Vietnamese artillerymen couldn't speak English, but they could read the coordinates and they figured out what I wanted. So when I started running back, I got hit with a 80 deuce. And I crawled in the dispensary, and my medic patched me up, and then I got medevac that night. So next morning I woke up. I went into surgery at 2 o'clock in the morning, and about 7 o'clock I woke up, and I had two of my people in that had come into the Trang to trade AKs for cartons of steaks. So they came to me in the hospital. No, I'm wrong. It wasn't the Trang. I was in Benoit. It was
Benoit.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I woke up, came out of the anesthesia, and I told them, I said, "Get me a uniform and boots." And I said, "Just get me the fucking uniform and boots." And so I got a baggy uniform and a boots on. I said, "Take me down to fucking C-team." And so he did. I went to the fucking, and I had fucking sutures all over my face. And I went in and told the fucking colonel, and son of a bitch that tried to get me killed, that he's a goddamn VC, blah, blah, blah. Well, the colonel didn't. He saw I was all fucked up.
Yeah.
And anyhow, I made my point, and I had him take me back to the hospital, and by that time the anesthesia had all worn off. And
you were hurt for certain then.
And I started to cry because they dropped me off at the wrong entrance. I didn't know where it was. I don't remember how I got back from where I was actually crying because
Yeah.
And finally I got back. They wanted to ship me out of Japan, and I said, no, I don't want to do that shit. So I went to Cameron Bay, and I was supposed to be there a week, and after 2 days I told the nurse, best let me out now, because if you don't, I'm going to be very obnoxious. And so they did. So anyhow, that was that. And
so when did this is your second tour, when did that wrap up?
I'm sorry?
That was your second tour of duty?
Well, no. I was with the 1st Division.
Right.
And then with Special Forces, but that was just one tour.
Okay. And so that all ends at what time? Then you come back to the States to do what?
Well, once again,
There's always a once again.
They found out that I wasn't supposed to be in Special Forces, so
Right.
they kicked me out. So I ended up as a company commander of a basic training unit. Well, that's not like being a company commander of a line unit.
Right.
But it beats the shit out of being a staff officer back at Fort Bragg, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I loved the job because it was great working with these young men and seeing how, in many cases, you had young men that had never done a damn thing in their lives. They completed basic training. So it was interesting to watch the transformation of these kids.
Sure.
And once again, it was a great job. So it seems I always seem to end up on my feet, even though I have been subjected to unusual circumstances.
So when your time in Vietnam and in the Army ends, there's a couple of transition years there, I assume, but I'd like to really get into the magazine and the purpose behind it, and then how, because I'm going to start it off with Soldier of Fortune magazine. Over the years, even on my personal base, in the last 3 years since I've been doing some podcasting with Jocko, I've had hundreds of people, all of whom served our country, and it started with Soldier of Fortune magazine. Then I'm going to pick this book up and read you that quote to you from him.
Well, that's certainly probably the thing that gives me most satisfaction of all the things we did, was the fact that Soldier of Fortune was responsible for influencing so many young men in joining the U.S. military. And as you mentioned, even here I've had, I don't know how many people come up to me and say that they joined the military because of reading Soldier of Fortune magazine. And that gives me great pleasure.
Yeah, and it's not like,
and
are we ready to roll again?
Yes, sir. We are rolling.
Oh, we are rolling.
Yep.
Okay.
And so
we stay rolling. I'm just marking the time.
Sure, very good.
As you might well imagine, I've never been idolized by the left wing.
Thank God.
Fuck them.
That's one of your characteristics that we. But so before we go into talking about how you began Soldier of Fortune magazine, through my last 3 years personally, Bob, I just got to tell you how I have met literally hundreds of veterans that have served, or men that are in the Army, SEALs, MARSOC, the Raiders, pararescue men, all of whom said one thing in common. When I was a kid, I read Soldier of Fortune magazine, and it influenced my thinking. And we have a classic example of one person that our country has come to know, and it's the American Sniper, and it's a story about Chris Kyle. And this is Chris's book, and in it, Chris signed his book for you, which I think epitomizes that moment and that whole expression. Soldier of Fortune, thank you for all your great articles. You actually piqued my interest to join the military. One of our heroes, one of our Navy SEAL heroes, and that's just one of thousands over the years. And I don't know, nobody comes back and says, here, Bob, thank you, or maybe you get that occasionally, but that's a critical point that we don't hear about that from any military service recruiter, but you were there because your stories showed the valor of our service members, whether they're in Afghanistan, Vietnam, you've gone back to some World War II things, and any contemporary issue. And of course, the POW was, by the way, I want to mention, we were talking earlier about that one effort. In your first book, well, that was first enough, but I Am a Soldier of Fortune. And then that is chapter 12, where you're honest, where you tried to get the POWs, but yet things failed, but you reported it honestly. And that's to your credit. And I think your personal credibility on an issue, you don't lie. People may not like what you got to say, but that's why.
Fuck them.
Indeed. And so through that, this work that you've amassed over the years with 40 plus years of Soldier of Fortune magazine, how did this all begin in that creative, furtive, cantankerous mind of yours?
Well, as I mentioned to you, what I planned on going to Africa.
And this is around in the mid-'70s?
This is in 1974.
74, okay.
So I went to Rhodesia. I'd been in touch, and I don't know how this initially occurred, but I'd been in touch with an American that had gone to Rhodesia and joined the Rhodesian police. And so I'd done a little reading about the Bush War, and I decided that I'd always wanted to go to Africa. So I went to Rhodesia after I had completed my work in Madrid, but the reason I completed the work in Madrid was that on the 24th of April of 1974, there was a communist rebellion, a revolution, if you will, in Lisbon, Portugal. Incidentally, the 24th of April can be looked upon as the date where that was the beginning of the demise of white influence in southern Africa, because the communists took over in Lisbon, and that resulted in their eliminating their colonies in Angola and in Mozambique. Now, what had happened when I was in Madrid, Micah Coca, the Life reporter, was on contract with Newsweek as a stringer. And the communists were very clever. What they had done was offer all the foreign press in Lisbon a free round-trip ticket to Mozambique, which you could not get a visa for until that time. And so there was no press in Lisbon. As a result, the London office called Micah Coca and told him to get his ass to Lisbon to report and cover the revolution. And I went with him. Well, I got tired of watching people run around the streets yelling and screaming, and so I went to Africa. And when I linked up with this chap, Bob Caldwell, that was with the police, and I spent 3 weeks with him. And I met some of his friends, volunteers from other countries, including England. And some of them were talking about accepting a contract with the Sultan of Oman after they finished their tours of duty in Rhodesia. So I got the address because I was just curious. So I got back to the States, I wrote to Sultan, and I got a response from his defense minister. And it gave me, included 40 pages of mimeograph type, which covered the insurgency, the type of work would be doing, medical care, pay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided I didn't want to run around, and essentially offered me a commission. I decided I did not want to run around the desert. What I started doing was selling the information, and I ran little articles in Shotgun News. Be a mercenary in the Middle East. Send $5 for full information. Well, Newsweek picked up on that when they did an article on Danell Corporation, which at that time had been training the Saudi Arabian National Guard.
Right.
So they ran this ad that I had been running in Shotgun News. And my God, I started getting inquiries from Bangladesh and the Netherlands and England, Australia, all over the world. And I got to thinking, and that's very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
So one thing led to another, and I thought, in conjunction with that, I saw that there was really no, at this time in 1974, there was really no adventure magazines, which was rather strange because there had been in the 50s, 60s. You had True and Argosy.
Right.
You had a second tier of adventure magazines like Blue Book and Saga. And then you had 4 or 5 or 6 what I would call pulp adventure magazines where Lieutenant Joe Smith and his 20 Chinese concubines sink the Japanese fleet while stealing the gold in the Yangtze River. Crap.
Yeah.
But they'd all gone out of business. So one thing that, a confluence of events influenced me to come up with this brochure that I put together promoting subscriptions to Soldier Fortune magazine. I remember that I had attended a party at a trade show that was put on by Guns and Ammo. And I was sitting down cross-legged on the wall next to Tom Ciantos, who was a vice president of Peterson Publications. And I was chatting with him about this brochure I put together, which is just 4 pages, which included the cover of the first issue. And I asked him if he'd be so kind as to introduce me to Bob Peterson, who was head of Peterson Publications, which was incredibly successful. Which he did, and Peterson was very nice, and he looked at it, and he said, never fly. Well, of course, he was wrong, which just goes to show that.
So who printed? How did you get, so you go through the process. By now you have a couple of writers, you're writing yourself, and then how do you get it printed, first off?
Well, what I did was I just started promoting the brochure to get subscriptions.
Okay.
And I
then the brochure
figured
grew.
out to print 4 issues, doing a quarterly, I would need $32,000. And so I'm selling subscriptions at $8 a piece. And so with my poor math, I figured out that to cover 4 issues, I needed $32,000, and I needed 8,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
In advance. I kept all the checks in a shoebox because if it was going to fail, I was going to send the checks back.
Wow.
But I got the 8800s, and I went to press, and that's what it started.
No kidding. And where did you get it printed?
First issue we printed in Boulder.
Wow.
I had an office in my basement.
Sure.
And then after 1 or 2 issues, we had it printed a couple of times up at Wyoming. And then we got to the point that those printed presses couldn't handle the volume. And so we moved to Denver, and then subsequently just moved up the road to larger and larger printing establishments.
And then eventually, as Soldier of Fortune magazine grew, you actually had an office in Boulder.
Oh, yes.
And
yeah, above a liquor store.
And so at this point, your curiosity and your interest in issues. So you went to Africa, and then where else? Because when things popped up, you were there. And it was reflected in the magazines. If you weren't there, your reporters were, or freelance writers. Somebody, like you said, you took some casualties along the way. And but the stories, the front page, some of those famous front pages were your people everywhere. And of course, Afghanistan, the first Afghanistan where the Russians invaded, like around Christmas time of 79?
December 79.
Yeah.
Well, that was our involvement in Afghanistan. Actually started and be traced back to October of that year. And I was in Washington, D.C., attending an Association of U.S. Army convention. And I was having dinner at a Chinese restaurant with a chap by the name of Tom Nelson, who was a low-profile international arms dealer. And one thing led to another, and he was telling me about the fact that the word was in intelligence community that the Russians had a new assault rifle and a new round. Of course, nobody had seen it. So this, once again, is October 79. So come December in 79, and the Russians invade Afghanistan. And the light bulb goes on. And I figure, well, if they're in combat, they're going to lose the small arms and ammo.
And this was the AK-74 that we were talking about?
AK-74, yes.
Reports on that, okay.
So I sent my reporter, Galen Gear, who had done 2 tours of Vietnam. Incidentally, Galen, when he was in Vietnam, was an auto mechanic. And as he says, he was the only auto mechanic in Vietnam because everybody else was SEALs or Special Forces or LRPs or Marine Recon.
Right.
But anyhow, he went over and procured a number of rounds of the AK-74, and then I had him meet my editor at the time, Bob Poos, who was a former Marine who had marched out in Chosin, former AP reporter.
Whoa.
In Seoul, because I knew that U.S. Customs would be so stupid not to realize what the significance of these rounds were and would simply confiscate them and throw them out.
Sure.
So we managed to get some rounds back in, concealed in a typewriter. As a result, we took it to something called the FSTC, Foreign Science and Technology Center. And of course, the rest is history. We beat the CIA. And we took great pleasure in that because, of course, we brought out a number of other items of Russian equipment, which we got paid for. I mean, and
quite rightly.
Yeah, I took a team over in September because at FSTC, they gave me a list of what they wanted to get. In other words, they were going to pay me $250,000 if I could get a canister of
the yellow rain?
Of nerve gas.
And that stuff that was reportedly, we had the whole yellow rain or the yellow...
No, this wasn't anything to do with that.
Okay.
$250,000 for nerve gas, $125,000 for incapacitating gas, $75,000 for AGS-17 grenade launcher, and they'd give me $1 a round. They wanted 10,000 more rounds of AK ammo.
And give you $1 a round. And by the way, this is also is part of your book here, which is on Chapter 18, Afghanistan, Round 1, Trumping the CIA.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Of course, the National Rifle Association did a big article about the round, which gave us great pleasure. But I took a team back. This was in March that I sent my reporter in. And he was probably the first reporter that had gone in as far as he did go. So I took a team in September back to get more Russian equipment. And we had been told by FSTC that we should not have any dealings with the State Department because the State Department and the Army were butting heads over who got credit for bringing out, in conjunction with the AK-74 rounds, a biological NBC, nuclear biological chemical filter from a BMP-2 Russian vehicle.
Okay.
Which my reporter and a British reporter had brought out and delivered to the consulate in Peshawar. So when we checked into Peshawar, or I'm sorry, Islamabad, as I was instructed, I called the attaché, U.S. military attaché, and advised him of the fact we were there. A lieutenant colonel came over from the embassy, a real asshole that advised us that if we went into Afghanistan, we could not be assisted by the Afghanistan ambassador or the ambassador to Pakistan, and we should not go. And I said, well, that's all well and good, Colonel. What's the security like on the road from Peshawar to Islamabad? And he said, well, there's no problem. It's completely clear. So we do our thing up in Peshawar, and one of my guys brings out 5,000 rounds from this little town called Dara, where they manufacture guns. It's on the northwest frontier. You can get whatever you want. You can get machine guns, you can get recoilless rifles, mortars, whatever. You want to buy some dope, how about some French pastries, whatever. So myself and Doc Peters, I had a doctor with me, we were out looking at some refugee camp while my other two guys were up getting these ammo and bringing it back. And so we come back, and the ammo is in backpacks on my bunk. They had gone home. Well, we got thinking, and yes, we had been advised that we were not supposed to have any connection with the State Department, but I got thinking. I said, well, we're supposed to be on the same team. And so that night we went over and we called Mr. Archard at the consulate in Peshawar and said, we'd like to deliver something. Would you accept it? And he said, well, certainly. So we take it there and drop it off. Next morning, I get a call from Archard and said, well, sorry, Mr. Brown, you're going to have to come back and pick up what you left because we cannot take it. Well, what choice do we have? I was tempted to tell him to take the 5,000 rounds and insert them in some body orifice. But anyhow, we went back and got the stuff, and we hired a taxi, an old Mercedes. Now, we have in our possession about 7 to 10 years of prison time in Pakistan.
Okay.
We have that in the trunk of the Mercedes. So we start driving down, and we about 10 miles out, we come to the first checkpoint. And I start to get in a white-hot rage because I'd been told there was no problem driving from Peshawar to Islamabad, 5 checkpoints. By the time I got to the embassy, I was going to kill the lieutenant colonel that told me that, and there was going to be immense amounts of blood on the Persian rugs in the embassy.
Indeed.
Fortunately for all concerned, he was not there. And I delivered the ammo to Colonel Mulder, who is the attaché. And subsequently, I have a letter, which I think is in the book, which is a thank you letter for what we had done. So I got $5,000 for it, but that didn't cover expenses. But
yeah, but getting through the checkpoints too could have been dicey.
But talking about the $5,000, we did get $15,000 from FSTC for the first AK-74 ammo we brought and the NBC filter.
Right.
So I've got a copy of the check someplace. It was some spooky shit. They were not really good operators as far as being clandestine.
No.
So.
And so as you go on, at some point, you got involved in El Salvador.
Well, what happened? When we were wrapping up, when we were involved in our efforts in POW efforts in Thailand, I had 2 of my reporters go down to Salvador to cover the war. And Bob Poos, who was a former Marine, and another reporter. So they go down there, and at some point in time, they meet 2 special forces troops that are assigned to the military group in Salvador. At that time, the military group was only allowed 55 people, which was insufficient. So, being typical special forces, one of the guys was named Tony Paniagua, who was well known in the special forces field, and they chatted, and they saw where SOF could provide them with instructors and assistants to supplement what they were doing. Because I had access to Vietnam veterans with 2 or 3 tours, in many cases much more experienced than some of the kids that were members of a part of the 7th group from Panama. So once I came back from Bangkok and got together with my guys, we decided, we had initially thought we were going to transfer our thrust from POW MIAs to supporting the ethnic minorities in Burma. In fact, subsequently, I had one of my people killed in Burma that was working with the Koreans. He was a West Point graduate, by the way, Lance Motley, airborne ranger qualified.
Wow.
But when we got back and started analyzing I had limited resources.
Sure.
Which is probably just as well, because if I had more resources, I could have caused all kinds of shit. But we decided, being practical, that Salvador would be best served, our efforts would be best served there, because the concern was that we saw that Nicaragua was under communist influence, and we were concerned about the communism expanding into Honduras, Salvador, etc. So we saw Salvador as a threat to security.
And again, now this is the time frame is the 80s.
Well, we're talking 1982.
Right.
So we started sending teams down. I took a big team down in '82, and we actually had we made CBS. Charles Carreau did a piece on us and what we were doing in training down there. But we were working very closely with the Salvadorian military. We provided them with instructors.
And during that time, you met and worked with people like Jack Singlaw?
Well, yes, we certainly did, but primarily with General Singlaw was our involvement with the Contras. And at one point in time, 1985, when the government cut off money to and as a result, CIA assistance to the Contras in Nicaragua, General Singlaw came to me and asked me to recruit a team to replace essentially the CIA influence. And so I did. I took a team down, and we started doing this training down there, but the training was terminated when we had 450 rockets shot into the camp.
450?
Yes, 450. It's difficult to conduct training with rockets coming in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we just, that was the extent of it. But yes, we did do it with General Singlaw.
And because in the end, the El Salvador efforts over that period of time were successful.
Well, yes. Unfortunately, the present government is left-wing. But we think we did make a contribution. You know, if we hadn't been making a contribution, till the Salvadorians wouldn't put up with us. I mean, although to be brutally candid, I think they got kind of a kick out of the fact that we were there, and not all of the mill group was exceptionally happy with us being there because of territorial imperative.
Indeed, and I just happen to have in my hands here a little of a medallion that was handed to you in the back. It reads Lieutenant Colonel Robert K. Brown, 9/30/99, in recognition of your combat support services with units of the Armed Forces of El Salvador, 1980 to 1992. That's 12 years.
Well, the last few years, it was just pretty much one of our people going down, our weapons expert, and helping them with their small arms.
But and again, a lot of those stories. I mean, I can remember reading stories in the Smelly Times and the Washington Post that were bent very much against the Reagan administration and efforts to combat communism in Central and South America. And yet, you turn to Soldier of Fortune, you got the side of the story of those who are fighting communism, which is one of the things that you've done from day one.
Yeah.
Where there's communists, if they're trying to influence a country, you're there, either writing about it or writing and maybe getting involved a little bit. A couple of times, like you did in Afghanistan, wound up firing some strong weapons at different targets in Afghanistan.
I'm sorry, say again?
When you're in Afghanistan, there's like 3 separate times you were firing. Well, it wasn't an RPG, but some kind of a shoulder.
No, okay. I'm probably the only journalist that has gone in 3 times to Afghanistan and fired up the Russians 3 times. First was with a 1936 British 3-inch Stokes Brant mortar. The second time and the third time was with BM-21 rocket launchers. And, of course, in my book, there's a photo of me actually loading a rocket into the rocket launcher.
And there have been pictures on front of Soldier Fortune magazine or in stories inside of you there.
Yes.
Oh, my God.
So, but, we did a lot of other stuff. For instance, we had one of our people, Larry Dring, who is very famous troop in Vietnam. He went to Lebanon, and when he returned, he brought out a lot of ordnance that had never been seen before. In fact, he brought this shit to my office. I mean, we're talking illegal crap, right? Like grenades. So I called, when Larry brought this in, does that name strike a bell with you?
That doesn't, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, anyhow, I called this FBI agent. The FBI kind of kept an eye on us. And so this is in sometime in the 80s. And so I called him. I said, Russ, hypothetically, if somebody came into my office and have some items of Russian ordnance that had never been seen before, hypothetically, of course, would you take it off my hands and get it to the right parties? And he said, yes. I said, well, get your ass up here because I got a lot of this shit. So one of the things we brought, that he brought out, was these instantaneous grenades that could be used for booby traps. In other words, you pull a pin on them, they blew up. There was no 4-second delay.
Right, okay.
And, of course, what he was doing also was training the Phalange in Lebanon during the conflict, during the war over there. And then, of course, Motley, who was killed in Burma, he was working, training the Koreans. And then I had one of my people got shot down in Colombia, working with the Colombians. So, we weren't just limited to training in Salvador.
No, and on top of that, you had stories. I remember reading stories about Border Patrol agents from San Diego going TDY into Colombia because they were bilingual. They were Vietnam vets that had gone to Border Patrol, and they were working with the anti-drug campaigns down there in that would be maybe the early 80s.
Yeah.
On top of everything else that was going on.
So once again, Soldier Fortune, we did a lot of stuff we never got credit for, like the article I was showing you about when, during the situation in Africa, we sent 40 boxes of medical supplies to Rwanda.
And you put some sort of a notice in the magazine.
Yeah.
And then people responded, as our country often does. If there's a cause, and you're just appealing to people from the humanitarian side, you're not saying, give me guns and bullets so I can go to war. It's like, hey, these people really need help. Yeah. And they did. And there's another effort. We had over 8 to 10 tons of relief.
Yeah. The thing is that we also did med caps. And in Salvador, I brought down doctors.
So for our listeners, a med cap is
Right.
what is it?
A med cap, in other words, we hold a sick call
Sure.
for the civilians. And so God knows how many people we treated. In fact, one of the SF medics,
John Doc Paget.
there we go, was on a lot of these med caps. And then we sent missions into Laos working with the Hmong medical missions. So this is stuff we never got credit for. But at least I have the satisfaction of knowing that we did have an impact. But getting back to Laos, what was interesting about following up on the POW thing,
Yeah.
when we came to the conclusion we had to shut the POW operation down, we were shifting into actually supporting the resistance movement in Laos. And we were bamboozled basically by this rogue CIA agent giving us all these fantasy, we subsequently found out, phony reports about how the resistance was recruiting more people and having more effect, and we were going to take over this whole province in Laos in conjunction with our POW-MIA efforts. And it was all bullshit. It was just him writing phony summary op-sums, reports, and we finally realized that he was conning us when he submitted an expense report, and he was claiming a certain amount for a safe house, which in fact my business manager found out was his home.
No.
Yeah. So that was the end. But he was a fascinating. I've met a lot of strange people in the course of my association with the magazine, and certainly he was one of the most unique. He was the son of missionaries, born in Burma, and he spoke not all, but 4 or 5 different tribal languages. So basically he was a Caucasian by genes, but mentally he was a tribesperson.
Wow.
And he was very shrewd. He just couldn't operate in a situation that the CIA required him to be.
Even the CIA has constraints.
Yeah.
And some guidelines they have to
work
work inside of.
And so, I remember one time when I was getting suspicious of his motives, why he would always come up with some gimmick. And so one time he came up with the idea, he said, well, I'll tell you what, Brown, why don't you give me the money to buy 6 M16s, and what we'll do is some Sunday afternoon we'll go and hit this drug factory with some Wa tribesmen. I said, well, that sounds like a pretty good way to spend a Sunday afternoon, and hit this drug facility. Well, of course, I gave him the money for the guns and never saw the money, never saw the guns.
Or the drugs.
Yeah, or the drugs.
To be blown up. But, also, because of your activism, your visibility through the magazine, and even at times creating controversy outside of the magazine that made you a national focus of attention, there were times that people had tried to kill you. You were on people's hit list, like Trujillo.
Well, yes.
Yes. I mean, let's not mince our words on this one.
Well, basically, the story there is that this is a story that was related to me by a soldier of fortune. That was an American that was the number 2 man in the dictator Trujillo's intelligence operation. His name was Robert Johnson. A superb author, by the way. He wrote some articles for Soldier of Fortune, one of our best writers. So we're having drinks one night, And he tells me the story basically, which of course is recounted in the book, about how how he had experienced a situation with the dictator himself, Rafael Trujillo, in which he had told Rafael Trujillo that this article that he had come across in Guns magazine, written by myself, which described how Castro was creating a arms factory in Havana that was being put together by a former Spanish loyalist, Regino Camacho. And Trujillo decided that he didn't want this to occur. So he had a hit team that he authorized to kill Camacho. At the same time, Trujillo wanted me killed. The hit team, which was composed of a very strange, bizarre group of people, according to this Bob Johnson, they ended up assassinating Camacho. And the only reason they didn't get me is because I ran out of money and I had left Cuba, which gets one's attention.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But you know, one of the stories that I still haven't solved, a mystery, was regarding Charlie Beckwith, Colonel Beckwith. What happened there was in the summer of 19...
And Charlie Beckwith was a Vietnam vet, an officer of Special Forces, and he was one of the founding figures putting together what became Delta Force.
Well, he was commanding officer of Desert One.
And Desert One, yes.
So in the summer of 1980, we started developing an intelligence picture which led us to believe that there was going to be a Desert 2. We started getting information we had two people that called us separately, were telling us there was going to be a Desert 2, and the fact it was going to be a disaster, that they were going to take a whole Ranger battalion in. We started getting more information, and I sent one of my people who was in the Special Forces Reserve down to Fort Bragg. He put his uniform on and just went around to the NCO clubs and the coffee shops and listened. And everybody was talking about Desert 2. So when we had the first convention in Columbia, Missouri in September of 1980, we had a late night meeting that went on for several hours in which we discussed what should we do with this information that we developed. That gave every indication there was going to be a second attempt to rescue the hostages of Iran. I had a retired, disabled, if you will, vet, Tom Cunningham, who was a SOG operator. I had Dana Dreskowski, who had been a B-52 and an F-4 pilot, Air Force Academy graduate. I had Al Marr, former Special Forces, who was a well-known knife maker, and a number of other people. We debated for hours, and also Jimmy Dean, who was well-known. And
yeah, from the Special Forces side of history, Vietnam vet.
Right. So we debated whether or not we should go public or not. And we were concerned because the upcoming election with Carter and Reagan. And we
Again,
figured,
this is September 1980. The
right.
election was 2 months away.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so strong in your mind at that
right.
time.
And at that time, it was very close. Of course, Reagan won by a considerable amount. But at that time, the polls showed it was a close race. And we were concerned because if Desert 2 if it was successful, that would be a couple of points for
a peanut farmer.
For Carter. Or even if it was unsuccessful, he might get a sympathy vote. On the other side of that coin was how this might affect Americans involved in the operation. We had 70 separate media that were attending the convention, and had we had a
formal press conference on that.
Press conference,
Yeah.
it would have made national news.
Sure.
But we decided finally not to do that because it's just a concern about American troops. However, what we did do is gave all this information to Jimmy Dean, who took it back to, not Jimmy Dean, what was his first name? Was it Jimmy Dean?
That's Jimmy Dean,
Yeah,
yes, sir.
okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Took it back to Charlie Beckwith.
Back at Fort Bragg.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
A week or so later, I got a call from this chap that I had sent down to
Hand off the information.
but down to Fort Bragg. And he told me that Colonel Beckwith was going to call me. And I blew him off because I didn't know Charlie Beckwith from Adams All Fox. And sure enough, an hour or so later, I get a call from Charlie. This is Colonel Beckwith. He's a very gruff man.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, and I'm quoting you, he said, Mr. Brown, you're a great patriot. If anything I can do for you, just call me. Well, I'm kind of in semi-shock. And I'm slow, but I'm not stupid. And I said, well, Colonel, I'd come out and like to talk to you sometime. You just come out anytime you want. So I waited an appropriate amount of time, a couple of weeks, and I called him and arranged to get together. And I flew out. He picked me up dressed in his uniform, took me home to his house, fed me a steak and scotch. We bullshitted until 2 o'clock in the morning, and he didn't tell me shit. And I always look back now and say, well, I should have been more aggressive and pushed him to explain why the fuck he called me and told me that. And I just never got around to doing it. And people that I were planned on talking to that knew something about the situation also have passed. So, but, people can say this is a bullshit story. And I say, well, that may be true, but it's very interesting to note that during one of my legal trials, that Charlie Beckwith, Colonel Beckwith,
Sure.
came down and served as a character witness for me. And when
That's saying something.
When the judge asked Colonel Beckwith, well, Colonel Beckwith, why are you here? And Colonel Beckwith replied, because Bob Brown's a friend of mine. Well, what can I say?
And then he went on to testify.
But as I said, it's one of these mysteries that's never been solved.
Yeah. And then you also had some unique experiences, like having lunch with a KGB agent.
Well, that was it, yes. I've had some very talented people work with me, and it's certainly been a pleasure with some of them. One of them being Jim Coyne. Jim was a two-tour door gunner in a chopper in Nam, and very, very talented writer.
Good writer.
So we were members, of course, of the Bangkok Press Club, International Press Club. We're at a meeting of the press club, and somebody points out this guy across the way who is the Russian political officer in the Russian embassy in Bangkok, whose name amongst the community, the diplomatic community, was Jaws. And allegedly he was responsible for wet work. So the person introduced Coyne to this Russian. And so the Russian said, well, we need to get together for lunch sometime. So we eventually did, and he knew what we were doing because he knew that we went to Afghanistan. We hadn't told anybody. This was in May of '82. So it was a very interesting conversation, and of course we went to this restaurant in the middle of the day, which we chose, and we went there doing this appropriate clandestine technique. We went an hour ahead of the time to see who else was going to be there.
Right.
And he showed up, and shortly after there was a young Thai that came in that was obviously his tail. It was an interesting conversation that we had. And we thought it was so interesting, we printed an article about it in Soldier of Fortune. And several days after the article hit the newsstand, he was relieved of his position and sent back to Moscow.
Anything to help out a KGB agent,
Yes,
indeed.
yeah.
So we've been going almost 2 hours,
Yeah.
and we've covered a lot of territory. But looking back, first of all, we've only covered a few of the stories that are in I Am Soldier of Fortune. And I encourage anybody who's a fan of Soldier of Fortune or you over the years to go out and buy it. It's been out a while, but it's still available, and it's a good read.
Well, if they want an autographed copy,
Indeed.
now get out your pens and pencils, people. If you want an autographed copy, which is no extra cost,
Indeed.
the book costs $30, plus shipping, which is another $7. If you want an autographed copy, then contact me at my email address, which is, get your pencils ready, rkbltcol@aol.com. And you all know what AOL stands for.
No.
Almost online.
Indeed. So is there any other things you want to reflect on before? Because I wanted to close out our session here with the end of your book, where you talk on a very personal basis about why and what you've done over the years.
Well, yes. I hate to have thought that I've dropped this piece of iron
Indeed.
all the way over here without talking about it.
And especially designed, right?
Well, it's customized.
Customized, yes.
This is a 1911 45 for the idiots out there that don't know what it is. And it's a pistol that I got down at a gun site. It's called a GSP.
Which is one of the leading training sites in the country, in Arizona.
The particular model is called a Slimlight. And what is unique about this is that it has certain modifications which reduces the circumference around the handle, which is good for my small hand, because when you draw quickly, you need to be able to have a good grip. So what they have done here is pinned the safety, and they have milled the frame down to the point that it's still structurally sound. They've shaved the grips and put in a short trigger, and that has reduced the circumference 7/8 of an inch. So this is a sweet shooting puppy.
Indeed. A 1911, stylized just for you, sir. And and again, in the conclusion in your book, which is the headline, again, reflects your spirit. As long as tyrants and liberals exist, and I am still kicking. I love it. And you talked about the Soldier of Fortune, the Cold War, different things that you were involved with. But then you said, I'm proud of the fact that the emergence of Soldier of Fortune offered Vietnam vets the recognition they deserved, a home in a sense, a meeting place for their souls. We valued their sacrifices, and Vietnam continued to be featured in SOS pages. We maintained from the beginning that the blood of our warriors shed in Nam was just as red as that shed in World War I, World War II, or Korea. Now we also cover the sacrifices of those who have gallantly fought the long and seemingly endless war on terror. A difference is that with the onset of the age of cyber intel, many of our reports are from our troops exactly while the action is happening.
Yeah.
And that's just part of what you've done over these years. And again, any last thought before we finally close out for tonight?
Well, listen, I thank you for the opportunity to send you a lot of bullshit.
Well, it's interesting because you always had the personas in the magazine, and then you had the way you've been attacked publicly often, but you still go forward, trying to get the truth the best way you can. And even if you have an effort that failed, you tell it honestly.
Yeah.
You don't try to pansy around it or cover it up or not talk about it.
Yeah.
You come back and say, hey, we tried, we did this. It cost me $300,000 of soldier of fortune money.
Well, I would say that in today's dollars, with inflation, it would be probably well over $1 million.
Indeed.
In today's dollars.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, we'll wrap it up at this point. And as always, we thank Jocko Willink Productions for making this production possible tonight. And we always thank our veterans who are serving today and for protecting our country. We thank the first responders and the Border Patrol, particularly with the issues on our borders today. And as always, we thank the American heroes like Robert K. Brown, who have fought for our country and after his time in service continue to honor veterans, their causes, to bring the truth of the war to the reading public. And last but not least, we always salute those who were not able to return home. And with that, we say thank you again, Bob, for joining us tonight. Be sure to get his book. There's many more great stories in there. And also, we have some of my personal books, which are Across the Fence, where we talked about a couple of stories that were there. Briefly, Tom Cunningham, who served with you, served with me at FOB 1. Short while of time, but he was there. He did it.
My pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Airborne.
All the way.
God bless America.
Hear, hear.
Well, there's one of our living cantankerous heroes in a different kind of way, huh?
What an absolute pleasure. What a guy.
Robert K. Brown.
Yes.
And in the early days, when he's talking about drinking a little bit, things were wild at some of those Soldier of Fortune magazine annual confabs in Vegas.
Yeah. I was thumbing through the book for a second. And I was seeing some great photos, of Robert K. Brown just back in the day, no shirt, medium machine gun, just very, very awesome stuff in that book.
And the one I always liked was the one in the 9. He got his beret on, no shirt.
Yeah.
And camouflage fatigue and the monkey on his shoulder.
What a guy. And those stories about his not only just literary contributions through Soldier of Fortune, but actually having an impact in some of these AOs where folks needed help and we were America proper was pulling out a little bit, and
sure,
Soldier of Fortune was going into it for the assist.
Indeed, and that was the humanitarian side would not get played up. Mm-hmm. If he said anything publicly, that a lot of, even back in the day, there was the people that were the anti-Soldier of Fortune, or anytime you mentioned, they said like spit in the ground, like, Soldier of Fortune, and it's like, hey man, there's another side to these stories, and also, have you read the stories?
Right.
It's like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Incredible.
Oh, yeah, because I remember going to his office, and he's so generous to help people. Because at one point, Soldier of Fortune had expanded, and he had this huge office in Boulder. And then things changed with some of the economic tides, and it was time for him to shrink the operation. Mm-hmm. And it took him a while. Well, finally, he had an accountant that came in and kicked ass and took numbers. And that accountant was the person that saved him. to help them really get things consolidated, get out of this big building. And then in the process, they found people who he knew, who he'd hired years ago, and they're drawing a salary or a stipend or something. They weren't doing anything or anything much that would justify the amount of money he's paying them. And he would feel bad, like, oh, come on, I've known Harry for 7 years now. But in the end, this was saved the day. So Soldier of Fortune kept going for 40+ years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough, but I only just met, Robert K. Brown. But he very much comes off as, the type of guy who wants to take care of his people, no matter what team he's running, a team of special forces or, the team at Soldier of Fortune or, the teams that were, helping him in these different areas. It's he seems like the type to take care of his guys.
Oh yeah, and there was a couple of times 'cause I wasn't able to get to some of the conventions for a few years. And finally he says, "Look, fuck it, I want you to come out. I'll pay for your ticket." Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so we went out and had a fun time, and then taking care of the people would be like, I said before I started writing, I said, I've got to use a nom de guerre. I just can't, because if the people at my paper know I'm writing for you and this magazine, my days there are numbered. And, I got this family I got to feed.
Yeah.
He goes, no problem, just do it.
Just like that.
Yeah, and they had inquiries. Who the hell is this Isaac Stotts, writing about that? And he goes, he's one of our writers. You don't know him. That's your problem. And they never found out. He was tight-lipped about it to the end.
So when I showed up today, you showed me this copy of Soldier of Fortune,
right?
Which is from 1987.
Yeah,
and it's got one of your first published. Was this one of your first published articles
with him? Yes,
yeah, with him.
He said there may have been one other one, and again, we moved to Tennessee.
Yeah,
and in my garage we still have 30 boxes that my wife and I haven't gone through, and so. There are my final stack of Soldier of Fortune magazines. Because a friend of mine sent me every article I've done.
Wow.
He copied them out. Well, Joe Parner.
Mm-hmm. So I just opened it up for the listeners here.
Indeed.
This article is titled, Never on a Sunday, NVA hits Spike Team Idaho and Laos by Isaac Stotts.
Indeed.
Amazing.
And for me, like some of the stories like that one, and we did one on John Walton with ST Louisiana and Tom Cunningham, who's been on our SOGCast. And those stories from Soldier of Fortune, I got those, that I could build them out for the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For each of the book, some of those things began. And it forced me to go back to talk to the guys and get some notes and build things up. And, of course, Lynn Black.
Yeah, yeah. And so... And correct me if I'm wrong, Soldier of Fortune is, in a way, responsible for a lot of that early SOG history and kind of lore that has developed, over the years. And you were contributing to some of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so much fun. It was just there's two thoughts off of that. In the early days, I never realized what the impact was. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to Robert K. Brown's accountant, and later I talked to his lawyer, and we were talking. They said, "We never met you." And I finally met them. I forget how, maybe 6-7 years ago, and they said, "We knew who Isaac Stotts was, but we didn't know who he was."
Yeah.
We kept hearing about this knucklehead tilt. And then at some point, I started doing we did a couple stories on the King Bee pilots getting awarded at the SOA, and a few other things. But by that time, I was gone. I wasn't at the newspaper anymore. And they said, "Whoa, wait, you're Isaac Stotts?" and then like now, Robert K. Brown's the beginning, but the stuff that Jocko's done with those podcasts. Oh, my goodness. I mean, when I flew out here on the airplane, somebody comes by. Oh, I saw you on Jocko. At the airport, somebody comes by. And then the third guy was he says, "Up, I've seen you on Jocko." He said, "But I remember reading about these stories in Soldier of Fortune." It's like, oh my God,
so awesome. I'm obviously, a huge fan of, everything we get to cover on this podcast, and knowing that these are the roots of, what we get to continue to put out into the world today, means a lot, and I'm happy we get to be a part of that.
it's fun. It really is,
It is.
And to give people, because I always knew the stories are good, ours are good, but then once they're out there, we tell them. Then we talk to guys that are in CAG, we talk to guys that are the pararescue, and most of them, to the man, they always come up and say, we've done some crazy stuff, but you guys are just fucking crazy. Well, I said, yeah, it's a prerequisite,
One thing I was wondering I didn't really hear us dig into it with Robert K. Brown, but when did your paths first cross? Like, how did you guys get to know each other?
Well, I read the magazine.
Right.
That first edition, I was in. I think that was. I think it was in the early '80s, or like around, maybe even as late as '85. Anyways, wherever I was, I saw that thing and I had a heart attack, because it's like, well, okay, at that point we were at the 20-year mark from the time the war ended. So from 75 to 85 was it's not. That's only 15 years. I'm going like, hey, I still can't talk about this. And so,
there it is.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, my God. And then I was out to visit my brother. I said, I got to go find this guy. So we drove by the headquarters. We went out. We had to run recon a couple of times before we finally there, and he was there. Because like one time he's in Rhodesia, another time he was, bumfuck Egypt or something.
And so you guys just rolled up on him and introduced yourselves.
Yeah, it did. And then it turns out one of the people who was working for him was Tom Cunningham, who's from our podcast. I think that was number, I don't want to misstate it, but like around 10 or 11. Tom Cunningham. Yeah, John Plaster was 10, so Tom was 11, I think. And he was, he was in SOG for a week. Came in country, processed in, gets put on the recon team, and lost his leg because they got overrun the third time. Then he called in his team leader, called in the gun run on his team to break the attack. Oh yeah, unbelievable! Just another damn SOG.
Yeah.
That's why we're here, buddy.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible. I'm glad you guys made that trip and got to find out who Robert K. Brown was.
Yeah.
And started that awesome relationship.
And it was fun and always honorable. Sometimes he get pissed, or sometimes he wanted things quicker, and sometimes he wanted me to do something where I couldn't do it. But we worked through it all. And just being down there today, I mean, there's always these stories that pop up that are new and different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah. So it was been fun, and it's like another chapter.
That's right.
And because of this, we started off with what he did with the SOG stories. That's why we brought him in the SOGCast.
Yeah.
SOGCast number 30.
That's it.
It's behind us. We're closing out, but any last thoughts?
Thank you, as always, Tilt. This is such an honor. I enjoy, like our listeners and viewers, just being able to sit around and listen to you guys chop up the old days.
We got more coming.
Can't wait.
Well, we look forward. Thanks for being part of the team.
Thank you, sir.
All right, airborne.
All the way.